This report of proceedings from a workshop in December 1996, European workshop on the impact of endocrine disruptors on human health and wildlife. So it was very interesting to read what was already established and concluded at that point. So I just picked a couple of examples for you here to read in the executive summary. The evidence that testicular cancer is increasing, the endocrine effects seen in wildlife in some areas were attributed to the evidence one had for exposure to endocrine disruptors, but also the need for adequate background data was established, and that a strategy was needed for assessment and monitoring. But also already at that point it was said we need to consider measures to reduce exposure to EDCs in line with a precautionary principle. So then after that, WWF and others were very active in the European Parliament because the Parliament had decided we want an own initiative report. And the result was the Parliament resolution in 1998, raising the concerns of endocrine disruptors and demanding policy action in the EU. And this triggered then the adoption of the EU EDC strategy in 1999. And following that, there was a couple of implementation reports, progress, a lot of research funded, as we heard from Pete already. And in 2006, REACH was adopted, which is one of the policies that should reduce and help reducing, controlling exposures to endocrine disruptors. In 2009, the EU policy on pesticides or plant protection products was adopted, introducing a cut-off criteria for pesticides with endocrine disrupting properties. We'll look at that later. And now we're basically waiting any day to get the fourth progress report on the EU EDC strategy by the Commission. And in 2013, the Commission is supposed to publish criteria to identify pesticides with endocrine disrupting properties. And this is 17 years after Theo Colburn's book, Our Stolen Future, and it will be 14 years after the EU EDC strategy was first published. So during all this time, the exposure continues and the scientific concerns have been rising. Because even today, the concern is even greater. EDCs are suspected to play a role in various diseases. In several EU countries, 1 in 5 men have impaired fertility. Around 1 in 10 women in Europe now gets breast cancer. And we have much more evidence of wildlife suffering from exposure to endocrine disruptors. So, why are EDCs special? And we already heard quite a lot also in the previous presentation. We heard about the potential for irreversible effects. Critical window of development is because it's a time in uterus, for example. We heard about the delayed effects, and that's actually what makes endocrine disruptors similar, problematic than PBT chemicals, because the effects are ongoing even if the exposure is controlled right now. We heard about the exposure in the womb, which may lead to delayed effects later on in life. So even if we stopped exposure today, we still have to live with the effects for the next generation. Also, high-dose testing may not predict low-dose effects, and we heard about the potential for combination effects. That means the usual risk assessment approach doesn't really work here anymore. We have an erosion of the margins of safety. We will have high uncertainties in the risk assessment, and that's why EDC should be treated as substance of very high concern within REACH, and therefore also be put on the candidate list and controlled in authorization. Also the question about scientific evidence of probable serious effects, because the question is always in regulation, how much evidence is actually needed before we take action? Well, let me remind you that basically Article 57F is based on hazard, and as we just said, EDCs have very similar and problematic characteristic toxicological profile, similar as similar PBTs. And the EU policies should prevent serious and irreversible effects. REACH is underpinned by the precautionary principle, and this is here where this actually also needs to have some meaning. Yes, we need some scientific evidence for probable serious effects, but that doesn't mean that these effects should already have occurred. I would like to conclude the REACH part by just flagging some ideas what we think needs to happen to move from ambition to action. So we think REACH provides the tools which we just need to start using, and one of the examples would be to put chemicals with endocrine disrupting properties into the authorization, on the candidate list first and then either into authorization or restrictions where it makes sense, and also to restrict the use respectively in imported articles, because this currently is still quite a loophole, also with regard to some of the endocrine disruptors which we think we already dealt with, such as nonylphenol, which is restricted here in Europe, but there's quite a lot of potential for example, the use in imported textiles, that nonylphenol is actually still leading to releases in Europe. Also, we think that the information that has now come in the registration dossiers that needs to be used, and the evaluation process of REACH needs to find out which of the information is actually there and which of the other chemicals warrant stricter controls now. Because so far we're still also battling with this lack of information, but a lot of information should have been made available now within REACH in the first registration deadline. And obviously the last point is more also addressing not only the official dissemination websites such as the European Chemicals Agency or Commission websites, but also I think stakeholders are doing quite a lot to provide information to the public. This is also something where the companies should actually look at the different information of their products and let the people know which chemicals they're using. I would like to conclude by saying that the tools are available. We need to act now, and EU policies such as REACH play a central role in this. And the exposures needs to be reduced. We think that after spending 150 million euro in the EU EDC research strategy, European citizens really have a right to have some outcome, some result of all that money invested into the research. And now we need to act on the findings. So a lot of knowledge is available. Today, CIN 2.0 is launched, and let's get started. And just as the last slide, I wanted to share with you the Environment Council conclusion from 2000, which already urged for the development of quick and effective risk management strategies on the basis of potential adverse effects on human health on the environment.